This abandoned shivering girl was spotted by a polar bear in the freezing ocean. What the polar bear did next will leave you speechless. A small figure floated in the freezing ocean, gripping a piece of driftwood with trembling hands. Her body was pale, her movements sluggish, as the icy water sapped the last of her strength. Suddenly, a white shape emerged in the distance, cutting through the water with alarming speed. It was a polar bear, its massive frame moving effortlessly through the waves. The girl froze, her wide eyes fixed on the approaching predator. The bear's dark eyes locked onto her, unblinking as it closed the distance, with calculated precision. Her breath quickened, but her body refused to respond. The cold had left her paralyzed, her fingers barely holding on to the slippery wood. The bear circled her, its powerful limbs creating ripples that rocked the fragile driftwood. It paused, sniffing the air, its gaze sharp and intent. The girl's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. She couldn't tell if the bear was hunting her or simply curious, but the tension in its movements was undeniable. A loud crack suddenly echoed across the ice field, breaking the silence. The sound was deep and thunderous, sending vibrations through the water. The bear's head turned sharply toward the source, its body tensing. The girl's eyes darted in the same direction, spotting the jagged ice beginning to shift in the distance. The polar bear growled low, its focus divided between the girl and the unstable ice. The tension was unbearable, each second dragging on as if the entire scene hung in suspense. The girl clung tighter to the driftwood, her breath shaking as the bear moved closer, its massive paw pressing onto the wood. The ice groaned louder behind them, and another shadow appeared in the distance, moving across the broken surface. Another bear. Two predators. One fragile raft. Would the ice hold? Or would this frozen battlefield become her grave? The girl clung to the driftwood, her body trembling as the freezing water lapped against her legs. The polar bear remained nearby, circling slowly, its sharp eyes watching her every move. It sniffed the air, then let out a low growl, a sound that sent a wave of fear through her. She couldn't tell if it was hunger or something else that drove the bear, but its presence was an undeniable threat. In the distance, the ice shifted with a sharp crack, drawing the bear's attention. It turned its massive head, ears twitching as another shadow appeared on the horizon. Another bear was approaching, moving steadily across the broken ice. The girl's breath quickened as panic gripped her. She was trapped between the freezing ocean and two apex predators. The first bear stepped back slightly, its attention now divided between the girl and the approaching threat. Its growls grew louder, deeper, as if warning the intruder to stay back. The second bear, undeterred, continued to advance, its powerful frame causing the ice beneath it to groan with every step. The girl's desperate grip tightened on the driftwood as she tried to remain still, hoping the bears would focus on each other instead of her. Another loud crack split the air as a chunk of ice gave way beneath the second bear. It stumbled but regained its footing, sending a wave of icy water toward the girl's fragile raft. She flinched as the freezing spray hit her, her numb fingers barely able to maintain their hold. The bears were now dangerously close, their tense postures signaling an impending confrontation. Suddenly, the first bear lunged forward, letting out a ferocious roar. The second bear responded in kind, its claws scraping against the ice as the two predators faced off. Their massive bodies collided, sending shockwaves through the already unstable ice field. The girl, caught in the chaos, felt the driftwood beneath her shift precariously. She scanned the horizon for any sign of escape, but all she could see were the bears locked in a deadly struggle. Each roar and crash sent fresh cracks spreading through the ice, creeping closer to her fragile sanctuary. The water around her churned violently, the freezing waves threatening to pull her under. As the bears clashed, the ice beneath her gave a deep, ominous groan. It was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. The girl clung to the icy driftwood, her strength waning with each passing second. The polar bears were now locked in a fierce battle, their massive bodies colliding with earth-shaking force, claws slashed and teeth bared, sending sprays of ice and water into the air. Every clash deepened the cracks in the frozen surface beneath them, the sound of splintering ice echoing across the frozen wasteland. The girl's grip tightened as her raft tilted dangerously, a wave of freezing water splashing over her legs. She gasped, her breath shallow and fast, her survival instincts pushing her to scan for an escape, but there was none. The bear's violent movements sent shockwaves through the ice, and each tremor made her situation even more precarious. One bear roared, its larger frame forcing the other to retreat slightly. The retreating bear, eyes burning with rage, circled back, its focus shifting momentarily to the girl. She froze, her body stiff with fear as its sharp gaze seemed to assess her. The other bear, undeterred, lunged again, intercepting its opponent before it could act. The ice groaned louder, a deafening warning that it wouldn't hold much longer. A massive crack snaked across the surface, racing toward the girl. She scrambled to the edge of her drifting platform, her fingers numb as she clung desperately to the slick surface. The bears continued their deadly struggle, oblivious to the fragile environment crumbling beneath them. Suddenly, the ice beneath the larger bear gave way with a thunderous crash. The creature roared as it plunged into the freezing water, its massive frame sending waves rippling outward. The girl's raft rocked violently, nearly toppling her into the icy depths. She fought to stabilize herself, her hands trembling as she pressed her body flat against the driftwood. The remaining bear stood at the edge of the broken ice, its breaths heavy and visible in the frigid air. It stared into the water where its rival had disappeared, then turned its attention back to the girl. Its eyes narrowed, its posture low and deliberate. As it began to advance, the girl's heart raced as the bear moved closer, each step pressing heavily on the unstable ice. The cracks beneath it widened, the water rising through the fractures. She glanced around frantically, searching for anything she could use to defend herself. Her hands found a jagged piece of ice, sharp and cold, but it felt woefully inadequate against the predator. As the bear approached, the ice groaned again, louder this time, and the girl's platform began to sink. She gripped the shard tightly, her body shaking as she prepared for the inevitable. The bear stopped briefly, its head tilting as if calculating the risk of the unstable ice. Before it could move closer, another loud crack split the air. The girl's raft broke apart completely, plunging her into the freezing water. The polar bear lunged forward, its massive paw reaching out as she disappeared beneath the surface. The icy darkness engulfed her and everything went silent. The girl surfaced, gasping for air, her body trembling from the freezing water. She clung to a jagged piece of ice, her hands raw and frozen. The polar bear swam nearby, its dark eyes fixed on her. Each powerful stroke brought it closer, its sheer size overwhelming. Her arms burned with the effort of pulling herself onto the ice, but the slippery surface offered little stability. The bear climbed onto a fractured sheet of ice, its weight causing it to sink slightly before stabilizing. It stood there, dripping, its heavy breaths visible in the cold air. The girl's breath quickened as she realized she was out of options. She needed to move, but her limbs felt sluggish, her body betraying her with each second. With a low growl, the bear began to advance. The ice beneath it creaked loudly, cracks spreading outward like spider webs. The girl forced herself to her feet, wobbling on the unsteady surface. She spotted another ice floe ahead, larger and seemingly more stable. It wasn't far, but the freezing water separating her from it seemed insurmountable. The bear lunged, its claws scraping against the ice as it closed the distance. The girl leapt into the water, the freezing shock knocking the air from her lungs. She kicked desperately, every stroke bringing her closer to the larger ice sheet. The bear roared behind her, entering the water with a massive splash. She reached the edge of the floe, her fingers clawing at the surface as she fought to pull herself up. The ice groaned under her weight, but it held. She scrambled to her feet, her legs shaking. The bear was only a few meters away, its powerful paws propelling it through the water with terrifying speed. She looked around frantically, spotting a long, thick piece of wood lodged in the ice. Grabbing it, she turned to face the predator. The bear climbed onto the ice, its massive frame shaking off water as it growled. The girl gripped the wood tightly, her knuckles white as she tried to steady her breathing. The bear circled her, its movements deliberate and measured. She swung the wood as it lunged, striking it across the snout. The bear recoiled, more startled than hurt, but its hesitation gave her a fleeting moment to act. She moved backward, retreating toward the edge of the ice. The bear followed, undeterred, its focus entirely on her. Behind her, she heard the faint hum of an engine. A spotlight swept across the icy landscape, cutting through the mist. Her heart leapt, but she knew rescue was still too far away. The bear lunged again, and this time she slipped. The ice beneath her feet tilted, sending her sprawling. The bear stood over her, its growl reverberating through the frozen air. Just as it moved to strike, another loud crack echoed across the ice. A massive fissure split the sheet in two, sending both the girl and the bear tumbling into the water. She thrashed wildly, her hands reaching for anything to keep her afloat. The bear surfaced nearby, its roars muffled by the freezing water. She spotted a rescue line from the boat, dangling just out of reach. With every ounce of strength she had left, she swam toward it, her body screaming in protest. The bear surged forward again, but the ice shifted, blocking its path. She grabbed the rope, holding on as the boat's crew began to pull her up. The bear let out one final roar, its dark eyes watching her ascend. The girl collapsed onto the deck, her body shaking uncontrollably, but she was alive. As the boat sped away, she looked back to see the bear standing on a distant ice floe, its silhouette stark against the endless white. Its roar carried through the air, a haunting reminder of how close she had come to the end. The girl lay on the deck of the boat, her body shivering uncontrollably as the crew worked quickly to cover her with blankets. She coughed violently, her lungs burning from the icy water she had swallowed. The crew exchanged urgent words, their focus split between stabilizing her and navigating the boat through the unstable ice field. A loud crash broke through the tension, drawing their attention. The polar bear, undeterred, was advancing across the broken ice. Its massive frame moved with frightening determination, leaping from one floe to another as it closed the distance. The crew scrambled to steer the boat away, the engines roaring as they powered through the freezing water. The girl sat up weakly, her eyes wide with fear as she saw the bear approaching. One of the crew members grabbed a flare gun, aiming it at the animal, but the ice shifted beneath the bear's weight, causing it to pause momentarily. It growled low, its dark eyes locked onto the boat as though marking its target. The boat jolted suddenly, the impact of ice scraping against the hull, nearly knocking the girl off balance. The crew shouted to hold steady, but the bear had gained more ground. It reached the edge of a large ice sheet, roaring loudly as it leapt into the water, swimming with powerful strokes toward the vessel. The girl's heart raced as she gripped the railing, her body still trembling from the cold. The flare gun fired, the red light streaking through the air and landing just ahead of the bear. It hesitated, growling at the bright flash, but continued swimming. The crew threw a second flare, this time closer to the animal, and it veered slightly, but not enough to stop its relentless pursuit. The girl glanced around, her mind racing. Her eyes landed on a large metal pole secured to the deck. She grabbed it, her frozen hands struggling to maintain a firm grip as she pulled it free. The crew shouted warnings, but she stepped to the edge of the boat, determined to act. The bear was mere meters away, its massive head breaking through the water as it surged forward. With all her remaining strength, she swung the pole as the bear attempted to climb onto the boat. The impact landed squarely on its nose, causing it to roar in pain and fall back into the water. It thrashed violently, sending waves crashing against the boat's side. The girl stumbled backward, dropping the pole as the bear regrouped. The ice field groaned loudly as another crack split through it, causing chunks to collapse into the freezing water. The bear swam to a nearby floe, climbing onto it and shaking the water from its fur. Its growls echoed across the icy landscape, but the boat's engines roared as the crew took advantage of the distraction to accelerate away. The girl collapsed onto the deck again, her chest heaving as she watched the bear grow smaller in the distance. The boat cut through the icy waters, leaving the fractured ice field behind. The crew worked quickly to check her condition, but her focus remained on the retreating predator. Just as the boat began to reach open water, a deafening crack rang out. The girl turned sharply, her heart sinking as she saw the bear leaping onto another ice sheet, its determination undeterred. Its silhouette stood tall against the horizon, its piercing eyes fixed on the boat. The girl gripped the railing tightly, realizing the encounter was far from over. The boat cut through the icy water, leaving the broken ice field behind. The girl sat wrapped in blankets, her body trembling from the cold and exhaustion. The crew kept their focus on navigating the treacherous waters, their expressions tense as they worked to avoid further danger. In the distance, the sound of ice cracking grew faint, but the girl's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. She couldn't shake the image of the polar bear, its dark eyes locked on her even as the boat sped away. The thought sent a chill through her, deeper than the cold that had seeped into her bones. The crew attempted to speak with her, their words gentle but urgent, asking if she could remember what had happened. She nodded weakly, her voice barely audible as she described the encounter. They exchanged uneasy glances but didn't press further, their focus shifting to ensuring her survival. A sudden jolt rocked the boat, causing everyone to grab hold of whatever was nearby. One of the crew shouted a warning as a large chunk of ice scraped against the hull. The girl's heart raced as she glanced back toward the ice field. For a moment everything was still, but then a faint shape appeared in the distance. It was the bear. The massive predator stood on a distant ice floe, its silhouette stark against the pale horizon. Even from afar, its presence was unnerving. It didn't move, only watching as the boat pushed further into open water. The girl's grip tightened on the edge of the blanket, her breathing shallow as fear clawed at her chest. The crew increased the boat's speed, the engines roaring louder as they put more distance between themselves and the ice. The bear's figure grew smaller until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the vast expanse of white and gray, but the tension lingered. Every crack of ice, every shift in the water, felt like a reminder that the danger wasn't truly gone. As the boat approached safer waters, the crew began discussing the nearest port. The girl remained silent, her mind replaying the events over and over. She thought of the bear's persistence, its ability to navigate the ice and water with a confidence that left her in awe and terror. She wondered why it had targeted her so relentlessly, and whether she would ever truly understand its intentions. The shoreline came into view, a welcome sight after the harrowing ordeal. The crew prepared for docking, their movements brisk and efficient. The girl's exhaustion finally began to catch up with her, her eyelids heavy as she leaned against the side of the boat. But just as she allowed herself a moment of relief, a loud, distant crack echoed across the water. Her eyes snapped open, her body tensing as she turned toward the horizon. Far in the distance, barely visible, the bear's silhouette reappeared. It stood on another ice floe, unmoving, its gaze seemingly fixed on the boat. The crew didn't notice, too focused on reaching the dock. The girl stared for a long moment, her heart pounding, before the figure disappeared once more. As the boat pulled into the harbor, the girl stepped onto solid ground, her legs unsteady beneath her. She glanced back at the open water, half expecting to see the bear again. But there was only the endless expanse of the ocean, deceptively calm. Even as she walked away, the feeling lingered. She hadn't truly escaped. The Arctic had its own rules, and some things she realized couldn't be left behind.